No one could later agree on what felt stranger that morning, the silence of the street or the sound that broke it. A slow, uneven clop echoed down the narrow road just after sunrise, the kind of sound that didn't belong in a quiet medical district. When the mare finally came into view, she didn't neigh or panic. She simply stopped. Right there. Directly in front of the clinic's glass door. Her legs trembled as if they'd carried her farther than they ever should have, her head hung low, and her breath came out in shallow, foggy bursts. She looked less like an animal arriving somewhere, and more like one that had run out of places to go. Dr. Evan Mercer noticed her only because his coffee cup froze halfway to his lips. At first, he thought exhaustion was playing tricks on him. Horses didn't just show up at clinics. Especially not alone. Especially not saddled. But there she stood, a chestnut mare with a dull coat matted by sweat and dust, reins dragging loosely, a worn leather saddle pressed into her sides. She didn't knock. She didn't whinny. She just waited, as if she knew exactly where she was and exactly what she needed. Evan pushed his chair back slowly, heart already thudding. When he opened the door, the mare didn't flinch. That was the second strange thing. Most horses would have spooked at the sudden movement, but this one barely lifted her head. Her eyes, dark, glassy, rimmed with red, met his for only a second before drifting away again. That's when he saw it. A folded piece of paper, tied carefully to the saddle horn with twine. A note. Intentional. Deliberate. Left there by someone who believed this horse could finish what they could not. He took one step closer, speaking softly, the way he used to when he volunteered at the equine rescue years ago, before life, debt, and disappointment pulled him back into small-town medicine. "Easy, girl," he murmured, though his voice shook. The mare's ears flicked. Just once. A sign she heard him. A sign she wasn't gone yet. The note trembled as he untied it. His fingers hesitated before unfolding the paper, a sudden weight pressing into his chest. He'd seen notes like this before, not on saddles, but in emergency rooms. Final explanations. Apologies written by hands that didn't expect forgiveness. He read the first line, and the morning air seemed to collapse around him. "I don't know who else to ask." Evan swallowed hard. The handwriting was rushed, uneven, like the writer's hand had cramped or shaken. The message was short, but every word felt heavy. It spoke of debts, of losing land, of a mare that had once been wild and proud before hunger and desperation wore her down. It spoke of a promise, one the writer couldn't keep anymore. And at the bottom, a final plea: "Please don't let her suffer because of me." Behind him, the clinic door creaked as his assistant, Mare, stepped outside. She stopped cold. "Oh my God," she whispered, eyes already glossy. "She walked here?" Evan nodded slowly. "Or was sent." He folded the note carefully, like it might shatter if he wasn't gentle. The mare shifted her weight and nearly stumbled. Instinct took over. Evan reached out, steadying her shoulder. For a split second, her muscles tensed, wildness flaring beneath exhaustion, but then she leaned into him. Just a little. Enough to say she was done fighting. As they guided her inside, the story began to unfold in pieces. Mud caked high on her legs suggested miles of travel. Old scars along her flank hinted at a life before fences. And the saddle, cheap, cracked, repaired more times than it should have been, told Evan this horse had been someone's last asset. Their last hope. What no one realized yet was that this mare hadn't just carried a note. She'd carried a choice. A line between survival and surrender. And by stopping at that door, she had crossed it. If this story already has you wondering how a horse could understand where to go, or what kind of desperation leads someone to trust their fate to an animal, stay with us. Because what Evan was about to discover wouldn't just change the mare's life. It would reopen parts of his own he'd buried years ago. And the next words in that note were only the beginning. The clinic smelled like antiseptic and stale coffee, a sharp contrast to the mare's scent, sweat, dust, and something older, something like long roads and harder choices. Evan closed the door behind them, shutting out the morning light as if sealing the moment in time. The mare stood in the center of the exam room, legs splayed slightly, chest heaving. Up close, she looked worse. Her ribs showed faintly beneath her coat, not skeletal, but close enough to make Evan's jaw tighten. This wasn't neglect born of cruelty. This was neglect born of running out of options. Mare moved quietly, grabbing water, a blanket, speaking in whispers like they were in a chapel instead of a clinic. "She's been pushing herself," she said, brushing her fingers along the mare's neck. "You can feel it. She's running on nothing." The mare flicked an ear back at the sound of Mare's voice, muscles tightening again. Evan noticed it immediately. "Easy," he said softly. "She's listening. She just doesn't trust yet." He knew that feeling too well. As he checked her pulse, memories surfaced uninvited. Another horse, years ago, pinned in a muddy ravine after a storm, eyes wide with panic, everyone else saying it was too dangerous to try. Evan had tried anyway. He'd failed. The weight of that failure had followed him into med school, into adulthood, into this quiet town where problems were supposed to be simpler. But here was another horse, standing in front of him, daring him not to walk away again. He untied the saddle carefully. The mare stiffened, head snapping up, nostrils flaring. For a heartbeat, Evan thought she might bolt, despite the exhaustion. Then he stopped moving. Just stood there. Let his hands rest lightly where they were. "I won't take it unless you let me," he murmured, more promise than instruction. Slowly, painfully slowly, her breathing steadied. When the saddle finally came off, they saw more. Raw patches beneath the leather. Old rope burns along her chest. Not fresh abuse, older, layered injuries, healed badly, reopened by travel. This horse hadn't just been ridden hard. She'd been surviving hard. Mare unfolded the note again, rereading it like it might reveal something new. "There's a name here," she said quietly. "Not the horse. The owner. Or former owner." Evan nodded. He hadn't missed it. A single name, written smaller than the rest, like the writer wasn't sure they deserved to be remembered. Caleb. No last name. No address. Just that. "He didn't abandon her," Evan said after a long pause. "He surrendered her." Outside, a small crowd had begun to gather. Word travels fast in towns like this. Phones came out. Whispers spread. A horse showed up at the clinic. Someone snapped a photo. Someone else asked if it was a stunt. Evan shut the blinds. This wasn't a spectacle. This was a crossing point. As they worked, the mare's strength ebbed. She nearly went down once, knees buckling, and Evan felt a flash of panic spike through him. He slid under her chest, bracing her with his shoulder, feeling the tremor run through her massive frame. "Stay with me," he whispered, voice cracking despite himself. "You didn't come all this way to quit now." Her eye rolled toward him, dark and glossy, and for a moment, just one, he felt something unmistakable pass between them. Recognition. Not of who he was, but of what he was offering. Safety. Or at least the attempt at it. They stabilized her as best they could. Fluids. Bandages. But there were limits. The mare needed more than a clinic could give. She needed time. Someone willing to take responsibility beyond paperwork and good intentions. That's when the knock came. Evan turned, annoyed, ready to tell whoever it was to come back later. But when he opened the door, the words died in his throat. A man stood there, hat crushed in his hands, boots caked with dried mud. His face was drawn tight, eyes red-rimmed, like he hadn't slept in days. "I think," the man said hoarsely, "you have my horse." The room went silent. Mare stiffened. Evan felt his chest tighten, old instincts clashing. Anger. Relief. Suspicion. "You're Caleb," he said slowly. The man nodded, swallowing hard. "I didn't know where else to send her. I couldn't follow. Didn't want to change her mind." His voice broke on the last word. "She always knew where to go when things got bad. Always smarter than me." Evan studied him. This wasn't a monster. This was a man who'd lost a fight with the world. "Why didn't you come sooner?" Evan asked, sharper than he meant to. Caleb's shoulders sagged. "Because if I walked through that door with her," he said, "they'd make me choose. And I already lost everything else." The mare shifted at the sound of his voice. Her head lifted weakly. Her ears pinned back. Not in fear, but in something closer to frustration. Evan watched as Caleb took one hesitant step forward, then stopped, as if crossing that invisible line might undo everything he'd done to save her. What none of them realized yet was that the hardest part of this story wasn't the journey the Mare had already survived. It was the choice that still had to be made. And in the next moment, when the Mare did something no one expected, everything would change. For a long second, no one moved. Caleb stood frozen near the doorway, hat clenched in his hands like it was the only thing keeping him upright. Evan stayed between him and the Mare, not out of hostility, but instinct. He'd seen reunions go wrong before. Animals remember pain even when they forgive the person who caused it. Or tried not to. Then the Mare made the decision for all of them. She took one unsteady step forward. It wasn't graceful. Her hoof scraped the tile, her shoulder dipped, and for a terrifying moment Evan thought she was going down again. He lunged to catch her, but she didn't collapse. Instead, she leaned past him, past the safety, the foreline, the unfamiliar smells, and stretched her nose toward the man at the door. Caleb sucked in a breath that sounded like it hurt. "Easy, girl," he whispered, voice trembling. He didn't reach for her. Didn't close the distance. He waited. The way you wait when you believe you've lost the right to ask for anything more. The Mare's nostrils flared as she caught his scent. Leather. The faint trace of old hay and open land. Her ears flicked forward, then back, then forward again, conflicted, uncertain. Evan watched the tension ripple through her frame. This was the moment. The one that would tell them everything they needed to know about what had really happened between these two. Slowly, almost painfully, the Mare lowered her head. She rested it against Caleb's chest. Mare covered her mouth, tears spilling freely now. Evan felt his own throat tighten. Horses don't lie. They don't perform forgiveness for an audience. If this Mare had been abused, if she'd been betrayed beyond repair, she would have turned away. Or worse. Instead, she sighed. It was a small sound, barely audible, but it carried the weight of miles. Caleb crumpled to his knees, one hand finally rising to cradle her face. "I'm sorry," he said over and over, the words tumbling out like he'd been holding them back for years. "I'm so sorry. I tried. I swear I tried." That's when Evan noticed something else. A scar along the Mare's jawline, old but deep, half hidden beneath her mane. Not from a whip. Not from neglect. From wire. Barbed wire. The kind used on land meant to keep animals out, or trap them in. Where did she get that? Evan asked quietly. Caleb stiffened. His eyes closed. "From saving me," he said. The room stilled again. He told them then. About the land he'd inherited, dry, worthless on paper, fenced with rusted wire and false promises. About the Mare, once truly wild, caught and broken just enough to work, just enough to survive. About the night everything went wrong. A storm. A collapse. Caleb pinned beneath a fallen beam, bleeding, unable to move. The Mare, panicked but determined, tearing through wire to reach him. Cutting herself open in the process. She stayed, Caleb said, voice hollow. All night. Wouldn't leave me. I thought that meant I'd always be able to protect her. But life doesn't work like that. Debt came next. Medical bills. Land taken. Work dried up. Feed grew scarce. Each day, the Mare got a little thinner, and Caleb got a little quieter. Until the day he saddled her, tied the note, and pointed her toward the only place he knew that might help. I didn't send her away, he said. I sent her forward. Evan let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Something inside him shifted. The anger he'd braced himself for never fully formed. In its place came recognition. He'd been Caleb once, clinging to something alive while everything else fell apart. But reality pressed in, cold and sharp. She's not out of danger, Evan said. Even if we wanted to. I know, Caleb interrupted. He stood slowly, wiping his face with the back of his hand. That's why I can't take her back. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The Mare lifted her head, ears twitching. She sensed it. Another separation. Another ending. Evan knelt beside her, meeting her eye. What if, he said carefully, this isn't an ending? Both Mara and Caleb looked at him. What if this is a pause? Evan continued. The chance. For both of you. He surprised himself with the words. With how badly he wanted them to be true. Because standing there, with a wild mare who'd chosen trust over fear and a broken man who'd chosen hope over pride, Evan realized something unsettling. This horse hadn't come to the clinic by accident. She'd come to remind him why he'd stopped trying. And in the next part of this story, when a decision is made that puts everything at risk, Evan will have to choose whether he's brave enough to try again. The argument didn't start loudly. It never does in small towns. It began with looks, with folded arms, with voices lowered just enough to pretend this was still a discussion and not a line being drawn. By midday, word had spread beyond the clinic. A wild mare. A desperate note. A man who couldn't afford to keep his own horse. And by the time Evan stepped outside to take a breath, 2 county officials were already waiting near the entrance, clipboards in hand, expressions tight with practiced sympathy. She's not registered to anyone with active property, one of them said, flipping a page. Which means, legally, she's unclaimed livestock. Caleb flinched at the word unclaimed. The mare stood behind Evan now, close enough that he could feel her breath against his back. She didn't understand the words, but she understood the tension. Her tail swished once. Her weight shifted. That note makes her surrendered, the other official added. Which puts her under county jurisdiction. Evan's stomach dropped. He knew what came next. Jurisdiction meant holding facilities. Auctions. Quick decisions made by people who'd never looked a horse in the eye and felt it look back. She needs time, Evan said, struggling to keep his voice even. She's injured. She's exhausted. We can give her 72 hours, the first official replied. After that, she goes where the system sends her. 72 hours. Caleb stared at the ground. That's not enough, he said quietly. No, Evan agreed. It's not. Inside the clinic, Mara slammed a cabinet shut harder than necessary. They'll break her, she hissed. She barely trusts us as it is. Evan leaned against the counter, running a hand through his hair. The old familiar weight pressed in again. That sense of being cornered by rules written for convenience, not care. He'd followed those rules once before. It had cost him a life. He wasn't sure he could do it again. That's when the mare surprised them, again. She stepped forward, slow but deliberate, and nudged Evan's shoulder with her nose. Just a touch. A reminder. Or a request. Mara froze. Did you see that? Evan nodded, throat tight. Horses don't ask lightly. That night, he couldn't sleep. He sat in the dim clinic, watching the mare breathe, every rise and fall a fragile victory. He thought about the rescue he'd walked away from years ago, about the horse he'd lost, about the promise he'd made to himself to never risk that pain again. And then he thought about the note. Please don't let her suffer because of me. At dawn, Evan made a call he swore he never would. By noon, a trailer pulled up behind the clinic. Not a county truck. Not an auction rig. A private one, old, patched, but solid. The driver was a woman Evan hadn't seen in years. Lena. The one who'd run the rescue with him before everything went wrong. I heard about your mare, she said, eyes soft but sharp. Figured you'd try to be a hero again. I'm not, Evan replied. I'm trying to be useful. They spoke in hushed tones while Mara distracted the officials with paperwork and technicalities. It wasn't illegal, not exactly. Temporary foster care. Medical transfer. A narrow path through a wide gray area. Caleb approached the mare one last time, resting his forehead against hers. This isn't goodbye, he whispered. It's me catching up to you. The mare breathed him in, then turned back toward Evan. A choice. When the officials returned, the trailer was already loaded. Papers signed. Time bought. You know this puts your license under scrutiny, one of them warned. Evan met his gaze. I know. As the trailer door closed, the mare let out a low, steady breath, not panic. Not fear. Something closer to acceptance. Or trust. Evan watched the truck pull away, heart pounding, unsure if he'd just saved a life or destroyed his own career. But deep down, he knew this. Some doors only open when you're willing to risk being shut out forever. And in the final part of this story, we'll see whether that risk was worth it, when the mare's future, Caleb's redemption, and Evan's second chance collide in a way none of them expected. The first snow of the season fell the night the mare finally lay down without trembling. It dusted the rescue land in quiet white, softening the scars of old fences and forgotten paths. Evan stood outside the barn long after dark, breath fogging the air, listening to the slow, steady rhythm of her breathing inside. For the first time since she'd stopped at the clinic door, he allowed himself to believe she might make it. They named her Mercy. Not because she needed it, but because she inspired it. The recovery wasn't fast. It never is with horses who've lived on the edge of survival. Some days Mercy refused touch, her wild instincts snapping back like a taut wire. Other days, she leaned into Evan's hand as if she'd always known him. Trust came in inches, not miles. And Evan learned to measure progress not by what she allowed, but by what she chose. Caleb came every weekend. At first, he stayed by the fence, hands in his pockets, unsure of his place in this new chapter. Mercy would watch him, ears turning, deciding. One cold morning, she walked the length of the pasture and stopped in front of him, breathing softly through the rails. Caleb laughed, a sound rusty from disuse, and rested his palm against her nose. It was the first time he smiled without breaking. With help from Lena and the rescue network, Caleb found work again. Nothing glamorous. Hard labor. Honest hours. Enough to stand on his own feet. Enough to rebuild. Each paycheck felt like a promise kept, not to himself, but to the mare who had carried him when he couldn't carry anything else. For Evan, the reckoning came quietly. A letter from the county. A review board meeting. Long conversations about ethics, responsibility, and where compassion fits into policy. He told the truth. All of it. He didn't defend his choice, he explained it. Weeks later, his license was cleared. Mara hugged him so hard he nearly dropped his coffee. Told you, she said, grinning. Some stories are bigger than paperwork. The real surprise came in spring. Mercy stood stronger now, coat gleaming, eyes bright, scars faded but never erased. One afternoon, Evan clipped a lead rope to her halter and hesitated. He hadn't tried this yet. He wasn't sure he was ready. Neither was she. They took one step. Then another. When she spooked, he stopped. When she hesitated, he waited. When she leaned forward, he followed. It wasn't training. It was conversation. And then, without being asked, Mercy lowered her head. Evan felt his chest tighten. He rested his forehead against hers, just like Caleb had that last day at the clinic. In that moment, he understood what this horse had really carried to his door. Not a note. A reminder that healing isn't about fixing what's broken. It's about staying long enough to let something new grow. That summer, the rescue hosted an open day. Families came. Kids laughed. Phones came out. Someone asked about the mare in the pasture who watched everything like she knew the ending already. That's Mercy, Evan said. She chose us. Caleb stood nearby, taller now, steadier. Not her owner. Not her past. Just part of her story. As the sun dipped low, Mercy lifted her head and looked toward the road, the same direction she'd come from months ago. Then she turned back to the pasture, to the people waiting, and walked forward. If this story moved you, even a little, take a second to share it. Stories like Mercy's only matter if they travel. And if you want to be here for the next one, make sure you're subscribed. Because sometimes, the most exhausted arrivals become the strongest beginnings. And sometimes, all it takes is one open door.